Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of history's strangest fever dreams, a tale so packed with elegant catastrophes, scented mayhem, and dubious health recommendations that it'll make your recent group text debate about oat milk seem like an academic symposium. Tonight we're floating into the perfumed swirling haze of Victorian elite society, where the only thing more intoxicating than authority was the substance people were literally breathing in. Ether. Yes, ether, the wonder party substance that blazed through parlours, sitting rooms, and the shaking fingers of England's aristocracy. Picture for a second the most privileged, uptight, overdressed humans on the planet, all tumbling around on velvet couches, breathing in chemicals and sometimes forgetting which nation they're inhabiting. It's 1800, your dinner gathering can transform into a rave without warning. There's not a single warning sticker anywhere, and if someone questions what you're doing, you simply claim it's medicinal. Darling. So, before you get settled, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely appreciate what I create here. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what hour it is where you are. Now dim those lights, switch on a fan for that gentle, soothing drone, and get cozy. Maybe even tuck your feet under, just in case a hallucinating noble wanders past. Stop for a second. Have you ever contemplated what it truly felt like to be a Victorian aristocrat riding the ether wave? How did ether even become the hottest trend when tea and suppression were already so fashionable? Was it genuinely safer than gin? Or did your butler just claim that so you'd quit weeping on the settee? Did anyone ever spill ether at a royal gala and accidentally create indoor mist? And if your neighbours were all inhaling mystery fumes from ornate glass containers, how could you distinguish if you were hosting a séance or just Tuesday brunch? And finally, congratulations, you've just awakened in London, 1847. You're dressed in £15 worth of formal wear, your physician has the bedside manner of a hungover walrus, and someone's handing you a delicate handkerchief drenched in something. Take a deep breath. What's the worst that might happen? Welcome to the most intoxicated chapter of elite society you never studied in school. It's time for introductions. You're at the heart of a candlelit Victorian drawing room, surrounded by rosewater, pomade, and so much cologne that the atmosphere is technically combustible. But suddenly society craves something stronger. Cologne is out, ether is in, and everyone's about to learn what happens when your beauty regimen gets replaced by chemistry. Let's paint the picture. You're in a sea of frothy petticoats and stiff-collared dinner jackets, drifting through a haze of lavender, sandalwood, and traces of mystery creature. There's a crystal decanter of perfume on the table, a potpourri bowl on every surface, and an anxious spaniel underfoot halfway elevated, just from the vapours. For generations, this was the Victorian solution to body odour, a challenge no quantity of rose water could truly overcome. But at least everyone agreed to act like it worked, until now, because someone, probably your cousin who reads too many French novels, has shown up with a vial of clear liquid and the belief that tonight is the night to break with convention. The sales pitch is straightforward. It's medicinal. Doctors prescribe it for everything. One sniff and your nerves will be as tranquil as a monk in a coma. You glance around. The matron by the fireplace is fanning herself like she's attempting to summon rainfall. The local vicar is already intrigued, which should be your first red flag. You've already weathered 1,000 other fads. You've choked down cod liver oil, allowed a doctor to attach leeches to your earlobes, and endured 3 months on the bathing with vinegar experiment. Nobody discusses the aftermath of that one. Why not ether? Besides, it's a scientific era. The telegraph is real. People have strong opinions about magnets, and nothing says progressive quite like trusting your well-being to something you can't pronounce. So you gather around. The ether is poured onto a lace handkerchief, cautiously, because it evaporates quicker than aristocratic enthusiasm for manual labour. You lift the cloth to your nose, trying not to consider the fact that your entire social circle is about to do something even the cat finds questionable. There's a brief tingling chill, a peculiar sweetness, and then lift-off. The world becomes fuzzy at the borders. Conversation slows to molasses. Lady Wilmington is giggling at the wallpaper. You realise with dread that you're also giggling, though you have no clue why. You're not even certain you know your own name. And that's it. The beginning of the revolution. By midnight, the drawing room has transformed into an aromatic laboratory. Half the guests are sprawled on fainting couches in various stages of euphoria. The other half are busy acting like this is perfectly acceptable. Someone has toppled a candelabrum, but nobody moves to retrieve it. There's a passionate debate about whether ether is more refined than gin, which is amusing because both groups are slurring their speech. This is how it proliferates. The following day, you'll hear about the marvellous serenity at Lady Dashwood's gathering, and by week's end, even the most doubtful of your friends are dispatching their butlers to acquire more bottles from the local chemist. Suddenly, the perfume industry is in turmoil. What value is lavender water when your competitors are sniffing scientific advancement straight from a monogrammed flask? What's the purpose of musk if your nerves can only be soothed by something that smells like hospital and regret? And so the great scented competition begins. The city's perfumers scramble to adjust, blending ether into rose water, bottling medicated sprays and creating advertisements promising a most refreshing sensation for the busy socialite. It's only a matter of time before someone starts bottling their own concoction in a bathtub, and an entire parlour spends the night believing they're floating. You can almost hear the future historians sighing. This is how the mighty crumble, not with a bang but with a snort and a cloud of vapour, surrounded by abandoned perfume bottles and the lingering scent of very poor choices. And as the embers die low and the scent of ether lingers, you realise you're witnessing the moment perfume lost to progress, and progress predictably lost to impulse. Welcome to the revolution. Try not to set your hair on fire. Let's discuss the first time you heard about ether. It wasn't from your physician. It was from your cousin Cordelia, who insisted it was all the rage in Paris. Within weeks, polite society is circulating glass bottles like after-dinner treats. The servants are confused, the footmen are concerned, and the medical journals are, as typical, about 6 years behind. You remember the moment you're sitting rigid backed at a respectable London dinner, listening to a gentleman explain why railway schedules are an insult to God, when Cordelia leans over and whispers, "Have you tried the French remedy for nerves?" At first you presume it's another one of her teas, herbal, dubious, and suspiciously green. But no, she produces a tiny vial, neatly labelled ether sulfurique, and winks. "They're all doing it in Montmartre," she says, as if this is both a recommendation and a warning. At this juncture, the guardians of good taste, your mother, the Duchess of Gossamer, and the entire Royal College of Physicians are theoretically standing watch over the boundaries of propriety, their mission to prevent scandalous trends from slithering past the lace curtains and contaminating the drawing room. In reality, their main defence is looking disappointed and occasionally banning rhubarb at garden parties. They have no clue what's approaching. It begins modestly. Ether arrives as a remedy, whispered about in sick rooms and apothecaries. Your local doctor, who recently prescribed powdered oyster shell for anxiety, is suddenly brandishing a bottle of the new wonder. "Just a whiff, and you'll feel as calm as a bishop on a Tuesday," he promises, while the bottle leaks suspiciously into his pocket. You're told ether is scientific, modern, and absolutely not addictive. These are technically all falsehoods. The guardians are unprepared. They're accustomed to fighting off the dangers of dancing too enthusiastically, consuming ice cream after sunset, and reading novels without a chaperone. But ether isn't a foreign vice or a working-class concern. It arrives dressed in silk, speaking French, and crucially, recommended by a doctor with an accent nobody can resist, a prescription delivered in flawless Parisian. The servants, naturally, are the first to notice that something is amiss. Mrs. Bradshaw, the housekeeper, catches Lady Charlotte laughing to herself in the conservatory at a fern. The butler discovers the youngest son attempting to explain the philosophy of cheese to a passing dog. The staff exchange glances, mutter about modern nerves, and double-check the locks on the liquor cabinet. Meanwhile, you're left questioning why all your family portraits suddenly look so judgmental. In the drawing rooms, the spread is contagious. No respectable hostess wants to be the last to embrace the trend, so ether sneaks onto every invitation list under restoratives. The apothecaries are selling out. Chemists, previously known only for smelling like cabbage and secrecy, become the city's most coveted party suppliers. Suddenly it's entirely possible to find yourself at a luncheon where the main course is chicken a la king and the dessert is a cloud of flammable vapour. It's not just the upper crust either. Ether leaps social boundaries with the agility of a cat at a fish market. Young clerks, society matrons and minor poets are all dabbing their handkerchiefs with the stuff, hoping for inspiration or at least a reprieve from the agony of being alive in the age of horse manure and rigid etiquette. By the time the medical journals publish their first warnings, some mild alarm regarding recent chemical fads, but no need for panic unless your vicar starts levitating, half the city is already hooked. The final blow to the guardians, their own curiosity. Before long, even the most resistant members of society are slipping behind the velvet rope just to discover what all the commotion is about. Your uncle, a stern man who once banned Christmas crackers for being too boisterous, is now seen floating blissfully through the garden, muttering that the geraniums are plotting against him. That's how it unfolds, not with riots, protests or dark alleys, but with laughter behind closed doors, doctors with a twinkle in their eye and the slow, delicious thrill of breaking a rule that nobody knows exists yet. The guardians never stood a chance. Ether was in, and by the time anyone noticed, society had already forgotten what it was supposed to be guarding. The year is 1847, and science means anything involving bubbling glass. Ether is the latest miracle, praised by physicians and poets alike. The promise? Instant relief from boredom, nerves and reality. The side effects, not mentioned in polite company. Everyone wants a taste, and nobody's reading the fine print. Let's start with the setting. Gaslight flickers over marble busts and overstuffed sofas, and everyone who's anyone claims to know a little chemistry. Your neighbour's cousin, who once visited the British Museum, is now an authority on every jar in the apothecary. It's the golden age of scientific optimism, when a white lab coat means never having to say you're sorry for exploding the kitchen. And in the middle of all this progress, society has fallen head over heels for a substance that literally evaporates if you leave the lid off too long. For the Victorian upper crust, ether isn't just a medicine, it's a sensation. There's a delicious thrill to the idea that you, a respectable person in a starched collar, might inhale something that makes you forget which fork to use at supper. In a world where even laughter can be dangerous if it rattles the china, ether is the ticket to temporary chaos. It's rebellion but with excellent posture. The scientific establishment, never ones to let a good bandwagon roll by without jumping on, are quick to endorse ether. Medical journals churn out enthusiastic reports, a most peculiar calm observed in the patient following inhalation, followed by hysterical laughter and spontaneous waltzing. Surgeons, eager to be on the cutting edge, begin using it in their procedures. The results are mixed. Some patients wake up marvelling at the wonders of modern medicine. Others wake up convinced they've been chased by ghostly sheep. Meanwhile, in the drawing rooms, everyone is a budding scientist. Handkerchiefs are soaked, stopwatches are produced, and bets are placed on who can remain standing the longest after a generous sniff. The phrase for medicinal purposes covers a multitude of sins. If you pass out, it's not because you're a lightweight, it's because you're a pioneer. Your grandmother claims it soothes her palpitations. Your younger brother claims he witnessed the future. Your father, who once scoffed at modern fads, is now requesting that the butler ventilate his study after every dinner party. Of course, not everything goes according to plan. There are a few complications. It turns out that pouring ether near open flames is a terrible idea, but it takes 3 small kitchen fires and 1 scorched piano to really drive the lesson home. Sometimes guests inhale too enthusiastically and spend the evening attempting to recite Latin poetry to the wallpaper. Every household develops its own set of emergency protocols, most of which involve lying on the fainting couch and hoping nobody tells the vicar. As the sensation spreads, so does the hysteria. Newspapers alternate between breathless praise and dire warnings. Society threatened by new fad. Are our daughters safe? Moralists clutching at the last threads of decency warn that ether will unravel the very fabric of civilization. This is before anyone invents jazz, so the bar for moral collapse is still quite low. Public lectures are held. Physicians argue passionately with ministers. The only people who seem entirely unconcerned are the chemists, who are now able to afford larger hats. But even in the swirl of anxiety, ether has become the new measure of progress. If you're not, at least, pretending to understand its scientific properties, you risk being labelled backward, old-fashioned, or worst of all, dull. Invitations to ether parties become a new currency. Everyone's neighbour is an expert, everyone's physician is an enthusiast, and even the most sombre of uncles now nod knowingly when the word sulphuric is mentioned. So here you are, poised between progress and panic, science and sensation. You're not entirely sure whether you're living in an age of enlightenment or just the world's longest group experiment, but you do know one thing: nobody is bored. The quest for scientific understanding has rarely been this exhilarating or this likely to end with someone snoring into a potted plant. Welcome to Victorian science, where the only thing greater than discovery is denial, and where for a brief, intoxicating moment, sensation trumps sense and everyone's a little hysterical. It's Saturday night, and the most exclusive invitation in town isn't to a ball, it's to an ether frolic. The dress code, formal despair. The activity, inhaling vapour until you can't feel your monocle. The food, mostly untouched because everyone is busy giggling at the wallpaper. Let's step inside. A row of carriages clogs the street outside the most fashionable townhouse in Mayfair. Inside, the air is thick with anticipation and several legally questionable fumes. Gilt mirrors gleam in the candlelight and every available surface is draped in damask. Guests arrive in their finery, swaddled in silks and lace, each secretly hoping no one notices that their hands are already trembling with anticipation. This is not your average soiree. This is a night for letting your starches down. You're greeted at the door by a butler who is definitely pretending he's not worried about the open flames near the entertainment table. In the parlour, decanters of ether sit next to the port, flanked by cut glass bowls of dried rose petals and a few nervous canapes. The host, always someone with more money than sense, raises a glass and announces, "Let us indulge in the wonders of chemistry." The crowd cheers, although it's unclear whether anyone actually heard the speech or just got a whiff a little early. The evening begins with decorum, as every Victorian gathering must. Gentlemen debate parliamentary procedure while eyeing the ether bottle. Ladies discuss embroidery with the wild-eyed intensity of those plotting escape. Soon someone cracks. Usually it's a minor baroness who's had a rough week. She reaches for a handkerchief, soaks it generously, and in less than a minute she's giggling into her shawl and declaring her undying love for the ceiling rose. That's all it takes. Suddenly the dam bursts. Ether-soaked cloths pass from hand to hand, and respectable matrons are soon found sprawled on fainting couches, recounting childhood memories they may or may not have invented. Sir Percival, who hasn't laughed since the Corn Laws, is now snorting with glee as he tries to teach a spaniel poker. Meanwhile, the ether does what it does best: lowers inhibitions, dissolves dignity, and inspires bizarre party games. Someone suggests charades. 5 minutes later, 3 viscounts are reenacting the Battle of Trafalgar with a soup ladle and an ornamental vase. Someone else proposes Guess the Smell, which ends poorly after Lady Foxton confuses the ether for her lemon hand lotion and spends the rest of the night trying to speak French. The host's staff, veterans of 1,000 awkward dinner parties, move quietly among the revellers, righting toppled side tables and gently removing the occasional unconscious earl from the centre of the rug. The footman tasked with refilling the decanters is now a local legend. Rumour has it he once revived the entire ladies' auxiliary with a single whiff. Meanwhile, the cook waits anxiously in the kitchen, listening to the distant sound of spontaneous laughter and hoping the veal will survive until someone remembers to eat. In one corner, the family doctor stands by with an air of resigned professionalism. He dispenses just a dash more for science to anyone who asks, all the while calculating how long he can stay before he's called away to tend to another fainting spell. When pressed for his professional opinion, he shrugs and mutters something about the future of medicine before wandering off to check on a group of young men reciting poetry to the grandfather clock. The ether party is, above all, an equalizer. Titles and fortunes don't matter much when everyone is horizontal and half the crowd thinks the wallpaper is whispering secrets. By midnight, the parlour has become a nest of softly snoring aristocrats, their dreams full of swirling colours, improbable adventures, and absolutely no memory of what happened to the soup. And in the stillness, as the candles gutter and the ether dissipates, you can't help but think this is history in the making, a brief, extravagant rebellion against boredom, an absurd chapter written in perfume and vapour. Victorian society will tidy itself up by sunrise, but for a few wild hours, you got to see what happens when the rules evaporate. For Victorian women, ether is freedom in a bottle, finally something more exciting than embroidery. Inhale, and suddenly your corset feels optional. Your suitor looks interesting, and you don't care what Lady Musgrove thinks. For a brief, dizzy moment, being delicate is actually fun. Let's set the stage. You are a lady of good breeding, which mostly means you are tired, over-supervised, and on a steady diet of boiled turnips and social anxiety. Every morning you're laced into a garment engineered by sadists, then told to keep your opinions soft and your wrists even softer. Your life is a daily schedule of sitting rooms, chaperoned walks, and learning to faint convincingly enough to escape Aunt Prudence's lectures on moral fibre. There's needlepoint, there's piano practice, and if you're very lucky, there's gossip about someone else's failed courtship. Enter ether, a tiny bottle of scandal wrapped in the veneer of modern medicine. At first, it arrives as a whisper, a remedy for nerves and female hysteria, those mysterious afflictions that seem to be caused by having too many thoughts or not enough cake. The family doctor, who, let's be honest, prescribes laudanum for everything from heartbreak to stubbed toes, starts recommending ether for your delicate constitution. Your mother feigns concern but is secretly curious. Your cousin has already tried it twice and claims it's the only way she survived last season's poetry readings. The first time you try it is at a tea party. It's all giggles and porcelain clatter, but underneath the lace, everyone is tense. An unspoken contest of whose gloves are whitest and whose sighs are most dramatic. Someone produces a bottle of ether for a touch of melancholy, and suddenly the real party begins. A discreet dab on a handkerchief, a quick sniff, and the room dissolves into laughter and secret confessions. The world softens around the edges, even the vicar's jokes seem funny. Ether for women is a quiet revolution. It blurs the boundaries of decorum. No longer are you just performing frailty, you're floating in it. The rules loosen for a moment. You're allowed to speak your mind, to laugh too loudly, to ignore the constant monitoring of your posture and your thoughts. You swap stories with your friends, confess minor scandals, and even admit that you sometimes wish you could run away and become a governess in Vienna, or even better, a stage actress. Scandalous, yes, but who's going to judge? Lady Musgrove is halfway through an ether-induced story about the time she once ran barefoot through the rain. The men, of course, are baffled. They stand on the periphery of these gatherings, nervously clearing their throats and pretending to read the newspaper. Occasionally one is invited to join the ladies, and he spends the entire afternoon in awe as the women, usually so reserved, devolve into giggling philosophers. The more conservative matrons disapprove, but even they have to admit that family dinners are much more interesting now that someone has confessed to stealing the cook's brandy. There's a practical side too. Ether is convenient, easy to hide in a reticule, impossible for a chaperone to monitor, and fast-acting enough to bring genuine relief from the relentless weight of expectations. Some women use it to get through interminable evenings of dull suitors and sermons about duty. Others treat it as a social ritual, a little secret shared between sisters, cousins, and friends. One drop for courage, one drop for camaraderie. Of course, the whispers eventually reach the men in charge. Concerned husbands and fathers commission articles in the newspapers warning of the dangers of female overexcitement. They consult doctors who, depending on the size of the consulting fee, either denounce ether as the end of civilization or quietly pocket a bottle for their own wives. But it's too late. The ether genie is out of the bottle, and no amount of moralizing will put it back. For Victorian women, ether is more than a fad. It's a breath of rebellion, a chance to be bold, be silly, and be for a moment completely unbothered by the endless tangle of rules. For once, being delicate is powerful, and languishing is the best fun you've ever had. You're a man of property, you own several hats, but tonight you're faced with a new social dilemma. Do you take the ether, or do you remain a paragon of restraint? Half the room is giggling uncontrollably. The other half is attempting to ignite cigars and failing miserably. This is what advancement looks like. Let's paint the picture. The gentlemen have withdrawn to the library, that wood-panelled shrine to refined taste and even finer brandy. The atmosphere is dense with cigar smoke and subdued swagger. On the mahogany table, positioned among crystal decanters and risque French novels, rests an inconspicuous bottle of Ethereum. For a moment everyone pretends to ignore it. They argue about parliamentary reform, discuss cricket scores nobody truly recalls, and share the story of when they nearly encountered Charles Dickens. But eventually the conversation turns, as it inevitably does, to the latest craze sweeping the salon's atmosphere. For the Victorian gentleman, the predicament is genuine. Do you indulge in this trendy scientific marvel and jeopardize your reputation? Or do you dismiss the fad and risk appearing hopelessly outdated? Lord Bletchley, consistently the first to sample anything imported or combustible, insists it's the greatest thing since starched collars. He flourishes his handkerchief and proposes a demonstration, inhaling deeply and within moments attempting to recite Shakespeare while simultaneously unfastening his waistcoat and praising the carpet. The room divides. Half the men, motivated by Bletchley's bravery, or perhaps the prospect of avoiding the evening's third debate about corn tariffs, follow his lead. They touch their handkerchiefs, take a cautious sniff, and shortly the library is bursting with undignified laughter. Sir Gerald, who last grinned in 1839, is hiccuping in a wingback chair, claiming he's discovered a new shade. Someone else attempts to recall his years at Oxford, but gets trapped on the word quadrangle and never breaks free. It's as though every suppressed chuckle, every politely swallowed grievance comes pouring out in one magnificent ether-fueled release. But not everyone is persuaded. The traditionalists clutch their pipes and their doubt. A real man doesn't require artificial stimulants, announces Colonel Swithins, whose concept of a good time hasn't changed since the Crimean War. He stares at the ether bottle as though it personally owes him money. There's discussion of moral corruption, of the significance of self-control and the erosion of British resolve. Someone whispers something about the French, and for a fleeting moment, everyone concurs that the French are likely to blame. The tension is overwhelming. Declining the ether can seem like confessing you have something to conceal, or worse, that you're terrified of enjoyment. But participating means risking your meticulously cultivated reputation as a man of restraint. It's a tightrope act, balanced between stoic poise and the alluring promise of a few minutes' escape from the crushing burden of gentlemanly expectations. Naturally, there's an element of rivalry. Who can take the largest whiff without collapsing? Who can recite Latin backwards or maintain a straight face while everyone else is roaring at nothing? Bets are made, regulations are created, and the typically sombre library transforms into a scene of moderate mayhem. For once, being a man of sophistication means surrendering to absurdity, if only for a night. Meanwhile, the butler stands nearby, resigned, polishing glasses with the same cloth he uses to clean up the occasional spill. He's witnessed worse, far worse if you include the incident with the absinthe and the parrot, but he's quietly hoping for the men to regain their senses before someone attempts to ride the billiards table to freedom. As the ether diminishes and the room settles, the men gradually recover their composure. There are awkward coughs, sheepish grins, and a rushed return to the comfort of port and self-deprecating jokes. But something has shifted. For a brief, vaporous hour, the gentlemen have experienced genuine freedom, the right to be absurd. And maybe, just maybe, advancement isn't such a terrible thing after all, especially if it arrives with laughter, a little humility, and the sudden realization that even the stiffest upper lip needs to quiver sometimes. It's 8 a.m, the birds are chirping, and your head feels like a misplaced science experiment. You dimly remember dancing on a piano and debating the finer points of taxidermy. The only thing remaining is the lingering scent of ether and a deep, unshakable sense of existential dread. The morning after an ether party is nothing like the genteel Victorian breakfasts you encounter in paintings. Instead of sunlight streaming through spotless windows onto crisp linen, you awaken to a room that smells faintly of burning wool and misplaced ambition. There's an overturned chair by the fireplace. A half-eaten custard tart clings to the curtains. Someone's left a glove in the teapot. All perfectly routine. If you exist in a state of mild chemical confusion, you sit up and immediately regret it. Your head is simultaneously too heavy and too light, like it's filled with wet cotton and misplaced regrets. The mirror across the room reflects a pale figure with wild hair and the haunted eyes of someone who just remembered reciting love poetry to a houseplant. Your mouth tastes like a mixture of rose water, brandy, and last night's poor decisions. As you reach for a sense of dignity, or at least your left shoe, the household begins to awaken. Downstairs, the cook is threatening to resign again after discovering a trail of cheese leading to the library. The butler is carefully extracting playing cards out of the soup tureen. In the hallway, a distant relative is still fast asleep on a pile of antimacassars, snoring the smug, contented snore of someone who hasn't yet remembered that they spent a considerable part of last night attempting to teach the spaniel poker. Breakfast is served. Usually this would be a social occasion. A parade of toast, soft-boiled eggs, polite conversation, and at least one person pretending not to be hungover. But today, the atmosphere is altered. The guests shuffle to the table in slow motion, gripping cups of coffee like survivors of a shipwreck. Eye contact is avoided at all costs. Nobody mentions the previous night. Not the dancing, not the spontaneous monologue about Napoleon's favourite biscuits. Certainly not the ether. Still, there's an unusual camaraderie in the air, a sense that for better or worse, everyone has endured something together. Lady Fothergill, typically the embodiment of reserve, lets out a snort of laughter at the sight of Sir Lionel's new haircut, which may or may not have occurred after midnight. Even the strictest aunt in the house seems slightly softer, sipping her tea with the quiet resignation of a woman who has decided to forgive herself, if only for today. Of course, the physical side effects are less merciful. Ether, it turns out, is not known for its gentle wake-up call. There's a dull ache behind your eyes, a tingling in your fingers, and the unsettling sensation that your internal organs are conducting a quiet protest. The family doctor is summoned, looking a bit worse for wear himself. He prescribes rest, a brisk walk, and absolutely no more vapour for a fortnight. No one listens, obviously. The only ones unaffected are the children and pets, who seem energized by the chaos. The youngest cousin is still wearing 3 cravats and a lampshade, announcing his candidacy for Parliament. The cat, as always, looks judgmental. By mid-morning, the memory of the party begins to fade. Guests disperse, some to nap, some to nurse regrets, and a few brave souls to actually read the newspaper and see if any new etiquette rules have been invented overnight. The staff quietly restores order, erasing the evidence of debauchery with the efficient resignation of people who have seen it all before. And you? You resolve to avoid ether forever, or at least until the next invitation arrives, promising good company and just a harmless sniff. After all, it's only polite. Welcome to the Victorian morning after, a little older, a little wiser, and just sober enough to remember why you only do this once a week. Ether started out as a wonder drug, anesthesia, a tonic, a miracle. Soon it was being distributed like party favours for every ailment, real or imagined. Sprained ankle, ether. Broken heart, ether. Bad poetry. Try a double dose. Let's rewind to the beginning, when the ether craze was born. Not in the back rooms of shady apothecaries, but in the well-lit, deeply self-assured offices of Victorian medicine. In a world where the best a doctor could offer was leeches, vinegar baths, or a slap on the back, ether arrived like a celestial gift. Here, at last, was a substance that seemed to work instantly. The first time a London surgeon waved a dripping rag over a nervous patient and watched him drift off to dreamland, the city lost its collective mind. Medical progress, it seemed, could be bottled. Word spread quickly. Within a year, every doctor worth his salt, and several who weren't, was prescribing ether not just for operations, but for everything. It was recommended for coughs, melancholy, female troubles, and the ever-mysterious diagnosis of nerves. Victorian Britain ran on nerves, a condition brought on by tight waistbands, aggressive wallpaper, and the stress of pretending to enjoy boiled mutton. Ether, the medical journals insisted, was a safe scientific solution to the constant hum of anxiety. At first, ether was the exclusive domain of the upper classes, administered in drawing rooms by physicians who looked suspiciously cheerful for men surrounded by so many sick people. A good doctor always travelled with an ether bottle in his bag, nestled between smelling salts and a copy of Galen for gentlemen. Some even advertised their skills in the newspaper. Headaches banished, hysteria cured, discreet visits arranged, ether provided. The lines between treatment and recreation blurred quickly. Society ladies claimed to need ether for fainting spells and minor complaints, but it was difficult not to notice that the spells always coincided with garden parties or particularly dull musical recitals. Gentlemen sought relief from the pressures of empire and estate, or, failing that, from a long evening stuck next to Lord Wroxham at dinner. It didn't take long for the side effects to materialise. It started subtly. A name forgotten at dinner, a duchess convinced her pug was reciting Shakespeare. Soon, the issues grew harder to dismiss. Dinner parties ended with guests passed out on the furniture, victims of too much ether, not boredom. Rumours flew of entire households out cold before dessert. Doctors tried to reassure everyone. Perfectly safe in moderation, they said, slipping bottles into their own pockets. But behind closed doors, panic stirred. Worried patients sent floods of letters. "My husband thinks he's a cloud," one wrote. "Mother won't stop singing," said another. "Is it normal for my uncle to sleep in the coal bin?" Even boosters admitted things were escalating. Demand kept rising. Quickly, ether was everywhere, sold in every drugstore. Housewives kept it on the mantel. Poets claimed it fueled inspiration. Politicians discreetly sniffed it before debates, hoping to make the Chancellor sound interesting. Then the regrets kicked in. The Royal College of Physicians warned of dire consequences. Cartoonists drew doctors fleeing ether clouds like startled birds. Doctors' orders became a party joke, usually before someone face-planted into the punch. The medical miracle was a punchline. Ether, once hailed as the answer, brought chaos and regret, and in tidy homes doctors nursed headaches and switched to gin. Nothing spreads faster than a bad idea in a doctor's script. Victorian courtship was awkward, now everyone's fainting. Shared intoxication spells romance and proposals get weird, love letters illegible. The top wedding gift is a monogrammed ether bottle. It's London, damp evening, and you, a hopeful suitor, are headed to a salon. Boots polished, you've practiced compliments and mastered brooding by the piano. Instead of small talk, a new ritual awaits. Ether is passed. Nervous laughter fills the room as handkerchiefs are soaked. Romance was a careful dance, coded glances, weather talk. Now it's nerves and unspoken hopes, worsened by complex rules. Add ether, spectacular. The shyest girl becomes the loudest, declaring love for Byron, daring doubters to duel in French. Suitors stumble over nursery rhymes, giggling, nearly swallowing cufflinks. A new etiquette forms. No longer punch, now a whiff? Handkerchief acceptance is a secret signal, a Victorian swipe. If she laughs, it's a match. If she faints, at least it's not from boredom. Matchmakers are stumped. Moonlit walks become spontaneous poetry. Maybe to the dog. Rings get lost in furniture. Swept off her feet gains new meaning. Ether romance poetry. Questionable. Love letters, usually flowery, turn incoherent. Penelope, your eyes are like mist and soup, one beau writes, before passing out mid-sonnet. Lady Evelina gets 7 proposals, remembers none, finds chewed parsley on a pillow. Parents and chaperones late to the game attempt order. Mothers warn daughters. Fathers patrol with suspicious bottles. The family doctor is called in, only to debate Aristotle with a coat rack. Even the vicar inhales mid-sermon. But there's irony in the chaos. Ether romance is the honest courtship society's seen in years. Masks drop, manners dissolve into laughter, candour, off-key duets, real feelings emerge. Lady Georgina admits hating embroidery. Sir Charles writes potato poems. Shy lovers hold hands, planning a bakery in Bath. Not all matches survive morning. Euphoria promises are quietly renegotiated. But for a few nights, romance lives in ether, chaotic, real, as society rarely allows. Ether, saint of bad proposals and grand declarations. If love's madness, Victorians found the cure. It's on the mantel, in a cut glass bottle. Downstairs, the staff knows all. As gentry swoon, butlers catch the falling. Viscounts and maids discreetly air rooms. Behind ether's disaster, a servant quietly judges. It starts with the housemaids, a craze of bottles passed like secrets. For servants, nothing stays secret. Ether smells sharp, lingers for days. Master's friends brought another modern air, says the maid. Now the cat won't come in. They're used to fads. Turkish cigarettes. Laudanum. Ether's a challenge. After the first party, the butler finds Lord Wyndham snoring on the billiard table. The maid dusting an unconscious girl wonders if this is progress. Servants adapt. The butler keeps coffee for emergencies and broth simmering. The head maid opens windows, braving guests' wrath. Maids master ether stain removal and scrubbing footprints without asking why. They overhear poetry, debates about seducing rhododendrons, solo waltzing. They're sworn to silence, but scandal always risks exposure. Yet they keep secrets. Silence is their currency. Sometimes the boundaries blur. A footman takes a harmless whiff. The cook serenades soup. Mostly they watch, knowing every fad has a price, and someone cleans up. As ether's a fixture, the housekeeper updates cleaning lists. Air parlours check for unconscious guests. Keep the dog from the library. After midnight, new codes, tips on reviving countesses, removing ether scent. Adaptation brings power. The servants know more than anyone upstairs. They know who'll faint, who steals handkerchiefs, which was the cat didn't break. It wasn't the cat. The butler masters timing, ushering out guests to preserve dignity. At night, servants restore order, rewriting history. Tomorrow, neat rooms, fresh linens, no chaos, except for knowing glances over breakfast. In every Victorian house touched by ether, the servants run the show, one bewildered baronet at a time. Ever mix flammable vapour with candles? Bad decisions? Victorians did it nightly. More surprising than falling chandeliers was nobody inventing fire extinguishers. Victorians introduced new tech without considering safety. The ether experiment captured this spirit, conducted in salons, libraries, the conservatory where ferns are traumatized. Add flammable anesthetic to open flames, silk curtains, distracted aristocrats. You get chaos. It starts with good intentions. The host, eager to impress, shows off modern chemistry. "Observe ether," he announces, as a footman stands by with handkerchiefs. Everyone gathers, squabbling over who goes first. Candles flicker in the draught, gas lamps hum. The butler's eye twitches. Mishaps are small. A dropped handkerchief, spilled wine. Lady Agnes singes her fringe, exciting, according to her hairdresser. A gentleman tries to light ether in a glass. Brief fireball, lost moustache. Chaos rises quickly. Someone faints on Homer's bust, resulting in a loud crash. Sticky spots from combined ether punch and dessert stain the host's rug. The dog, now fond of ether-soaked cloths, sleeps upside down in the coal scuttle. The worst, ether and flame. Candles everywhere, oil lamps, roaring fireplaces. Tradition trumps everything. A distracted guest waving an ethered handkerchief near the candelabra becomes a pyrotechnics show. Scorched tablecloths, bald spots unveiled as men pat their singed hair. It isn't just fire. Ether makes people dizzy, confused, clumsy, bad for porcelain figurines and antique glassware. Evenings lost to shattering vases, toppled screens. A maid discovering the umbrella stand has been mistaken for a chamber pot. Medical mishaps are frequent. Guests wake up on the floor believing they've been transported to another dimension and tangled in Turkish carpets. The aftermath? Victorian discretion. Guests smooth hair, dust off debris, assure their host they enjoyed the show. Resourceful staff cover burn marks with potted palms. The doctor prescribes fresh air and sherry. The next day, the host surveys scorched curtains, broken heirlooms, singed pride. But never mind, invitations for the next ether frolic are already going out. In Victorian England, science moves forward, even if it sets the parlour on fire along the way. Even the nursery isn't safe. Curious children find the ether, and the governess is reading bedtime stories to toddlers convinced they're floating above the Thames. Victorian parenting, still a work in progress. Picture it, the grand townhouse at dusk. Upstairs, grown-ups laugh, vapour, abstract conversation. Down the hall, lace-trimmed nursery full of stuffed animals unfolds a new adventure. It starts with curiosity, an unlocked cabinet. Master Archie, age 7, already experiments with treacle and clockwork mice. The mysterious glass bottles will expand his scientific inquiries in bold new directions. Ether, to a Victorian child, is magic potion. It's labelled for nerves. What's more nerve-wracking than spelling? Or piano? Miss Jane, age 9, says adults enjoy it, so it must be either dangerous or highly desirable. A whispered vote decides an experiment is needed. Application is predictably messy. A doll's bonnet is soaked, a napkin is dabbed, and the nursery smells of lavender, birthday candles, and poor judgment. The twins claim to see undiscovered colours. Archie tells his sister she's turned into a flamingo. The cat bolts. The maid, entering with boiled sweets, sees 3 children holding curtain tassels, attempting to float. The governess, underpaid, walks into mayhem. It's cheerful anarchy. One child recites Latin backwards, another spins while singing about steamboats, a third sees the entire empire from the window. The room is chaos, scattered toys, an overturned footstool. The governess, torn between horror and the urge to laugh, restores order. With all the sternness she can muster, she threatens to write to every relative, though she secretly treasures Archie saluting the wallpaper. Once everyone is corralled into beds, the aftermath is peaceful. The ether, like Victorian fads, is fleeting, and the children drift into deep sleep. The governess wonders if ether has been secretly used in nurseries for years. It's more effective than stories about obedient foxes. By morning, the incident is legendary. The children whisper tales of cloud voyages over breakfast. Master Archie, future barrister or train robber, pockets a handkerchief for future research. The cat avoids the nursery. Meanwhile, the adults discuss poetry and vapour in the drawing room. Their children have become pioneers in the art of questionable decision-making. The staff, of course, know everything. The nursemaid leaves tea for the governess. The housekeeper moves ether to a higher shelf. Victorian society valued order, discipline, propriety. Yet in every great house, rebellion brewed, sometimes wearing pinafores and always watching for the next forbidden adventure. When it comes to curiosity and chaos, children are the true inheritors of the Victorian spirit. Ether wasn't just for parties. The medical establishment prescribed it for everything. Apothecaries did brisk business, and nobody asked questions about the ingredients. It all began with good intentions. Victorians, desperate for remedies, embraced ether. Surgeons hailed it for pain relief. Family doctors added it to their cures. Mixed with hope, what could go wrong? The result was an explosion of new suppliers. The neighbourhood apothecary became society's newest obsession. Jars of powders jostled for space as ether took pride of place. Getting it was absurdly easy. 1. Develop a vague complaint. "Doctor, I get melancholy at tea." 2. Wait as the chemist nods and produces a bottle. 3. Accept your medicine with a wink and the unspoken agreement that nobody mentions it to father. The doctors were an odd bunch. There were earnest men in spectacles hoping to help, and there were fashionable physicians with silk-lined bags and egos to match. Some folks got known for overdoing it with the demos, making society women swoon and society men get unusually deep about chairs. Word is, Dr. Percival Street John, a real showman of a physician, threw these private get-togethers where the therapy was passing around a bottle and chatting about love poems. Then came the dandies, young guys obsessed with fashion who jumped on ether as a way to stand out. Their thing was to be seen turning up their noses at sherry for vapour and mastering the art of dramatic fainting. A dandy's going-out gear wasn't just a perfect tie, but a flask with his initials on it, plus stories about how Europeans were way more stylish with it. In Paris, if you could crack a joke right before passing out, even better. But not all ether came from legit sources. If folks want it, somebody will sell it. And where there's supply, there are shady types in alleys peddling whatever they call the real thing. Fake pharmacies popped up overnight, selling watered-down stuff that smelled like turpentine. Newspapers started reporting poisonings. The criminal world saw easy money in supplying the desperate, the curious and the bored. If you weren't careful, that calming vapour might just leave you sick as a dog or missing your wallet. Still, for some, that risk was the thrill. Ether parties turned into contests to see who had the most exclusive supplier, the purest vapour, the craziest story of how they got it. The line between medical wonder and status symbol got blurry until it was all one big swirling mess of fashion, chemistry, and terrible choices. By the time the craze died down, doctors were issuing warnings. Pharmacists were checking their labels twice, and the dandies were already hunting for the next thing. But for a brief, wild moment, everyone in Victorian high society, from top surgeons to street hustlers, was into ether, and nobody knew if they were fixing society or making it way weirder. Rumour has it even the royals were dabbling. If that's true, it was the one time a British monarch was both in charge and the life of the party. Etiquette is strict at the palace. Unless somebody drops the ether bottle, then all bets are off. It's a cold night at Buckingham Palace, and the halls are packed with footmen in uniform, anxious assistants, and a bunch of fancy people trying to look both stylish and a little scared. Queen Victoria is sitting at the head of a table so long it needs its own zip code. Everything looks normal. Stiff formality, careful chatter, soup being passed around slowly. But underneath, there's a buzz. Something new is going around the royal crowd. It starts innocently, like always. Prince Albert, always looking for new stuff, heard about this medical breakthrough from Europe and wants to impress his wife and her crew. Ether, he says, is the future of science and feeling chill. He even had it delivered by royal messenger, so it got more attention than most dukes. The royal doctor, wanting to please and a little influenced by the hype, shows off its value by giving the Duchess of Kent a quick sniff, and she says she feels amazing. Soon, ether is being offered as seriously as the best sherry. Bottles with the royal crest on them show up next to the teapots. The ladies in waiting trade glances, half scandalised, half interested. Some whisper that the Queen herself said it was okay to try it, as long as it's behind closed doors and the Archbishop of Canterbury doesn't see. Of course, somebody takes it too far. Lord Elgin, never missing a trend, sniffs way too much and has to be helped to the chaise lounge by 3 footmen and Princess Alice, who's cracking up. Across the table, the Countess of Fife starts giggling and spills dessert into a priceless inkwell. In the next room, some assistant is writing poems to the royal corgis, who've honestly heard worse. Protocol falls apart fast. The Master of Ceremonies, who's supposed to keep the monarchy on schedule, is chasing after a group of lords trying to test the acoustics of the staircase by singing "God Save the Queen" really loud in a silly voice. Etiquette books are checked in a hurry, but they don't say how to deal with a nobleman who thinks he's invented a new dance that only uses knees. Through it all, Queen Victoria looks on, dignified but amused. She's used to medical innovation. She famously supported chloroform for childbirth, which horrified half the bishops in England. Maybe she sees ether as a harmless escape for her court, a way for her uptight aristocrats to relax a little and forget about running an empire for a few minutes. Or maybe she just enjoys watching some ambassador try to curtsy to a potted plant. Of course, discretion is key. Officially, nobody at court is doing anything more scandalous than going for a brisk walk. Off the record, rumours fly. Did Prince Leopold really throw a midnight ether party? Was the Archbishop caught napping in the library with a suspiciously sweet-smelling handkerchief? Did the Queen herself ever take a whiff? The palace won't say, but the effect is obvious. For a short, hazy time, the monarchy isn't just the head of state, it's where the party's at. The strictest rules get bent. Laughter echoes in the hallways, and even the grumpiest old lady finds herself smiling at the memory of a night when Buckingham Palace was all about progress, curiosity, and a little bottle of trouble. Eventually, the courtiers pull themselves together, the servants restore order, and the official story stays spotless. But behind the palace doors, there's a little bit of rebellion hanging in the air, a reminder that even queens and kings need to let loose sometimes. And their guards too, once the press catches on. Ether becomes the latest headline scandal, usually between a story about train delays and an editorial about how dangerous jazz hands are. At first, the papers are just curious. Editors send their newest reporters to check out this weird new medical vapour people are whispering about in fancy drawing rooms. A small piece shows up in the society section, next to news about Lady Havisham's dog's birthday. The writing is careful. it has been observed that some advanced social circles indulge in continental chemical amusements. The medical community remains divided. Nobody knows what's happening. But someone aunt fainted into the trifle. But things escalate quickly. A rival paper gets a hold of a really juicy detail. A viscount, normally known for being sober, was seen trying to conduct the orchestra at Covent Garden with a dessert spoon. Suddenly, ether is everywhere. Headlines scream, "Gaslight and gasps," "The peril in our parlours," and "Society swoons, new fad sweeps London's elite." Cartoonists are having a field day, drawing pictures of fancy guys with monocles collapsing into flowers and socialites professing their love for umbrella stands. Cheap sensational novels jump on the trend, warning of ghosts and secret societies, all fueled by a sniff of ether. One story is about a masked ball that turns into chaos after the host's soothing vapour makes everyone dance backward to invisible bagpipes. Middle-class parents get worried. Letters flood the editors. Is our youth at risk? Will my daughter abandon her embroidery for ether? Asks one anxious mother, whose daughter never liked embroidery anyway. Public outrage comes after the curiosity. Moral reformers, always ready for a crisis, take to the opinion pages. Is this the end of civilization? Asks Reverend Josiah Broome, warning that ether could lead to laziness and, worse, the French. The Times prints a serious editorial. We as a nation must ask ourselves whether progress is measured by scientific discoveries or by the ability to stay upright during dinner. Satirical magazines suggest a new law, the Proper Use of Handkerchiefs Act, 1848. Doctors are asked to defend themselves. Some write angry letters calling out the ignorant scaremongering of the tabloids. Others, more entrepreneurial, run ads for real medical ether, as recommended by top doctors. Pharmacists see a boom in business, while also having to reassure nervous customers. No, madam, it will not cause your husband to think your neighbour's goose is attractive. Meanwhile, fancy people try to deal with the storm, with mixed results. Some, being practical, just hire PR agents. Others try to say they never liked ether, preferring a brisk walk and sherry. The boldest double down, hosting educational nights on the wonders of chemistry, just for science, of course. Rumour has it that the Duchess of Pembridge agreed to show responsible ether use, only to be found napping mid-lecture with her glasses crooked. But scandal cuts both ways. For every angry comment, there's a new guest at the next ether party. Young men try to get the most exclusive vapours. Young women start adding experimental chemistry to their list of skills. The press, despite its warnings, can't help covering every new crazy detail. Sales skyrocket, and the ether craze burns even brighter, fueled by the breathless attention of London's reporters. The public shakes its head, while secretly checking the society pages for the next outrageous story. In Victorian England, scandal isn't the end. It's just the start of the next sensation. So if you wonder why new trends last longer than they should, thank the press. Nobody writes a better love letter to disaster than a bored Victorian journalist. The church is not amused. Sermons warn of moral decay, and pamphlets claim ether will dissolve your sense of danger, duty, and maybe your eyebrows. For some, that's extra motivation. Victorian England, despite its science, still goes to church every Sunday, scared of hell. And the ether craze, with its vapours and visions, is causing some religious unease. The first complaints are quiet. A bishop's secretary finds a scented handkerchief in the cathedral, and a rural vicar notices the congregation snoozing through the sermon, looking dreamy and happy. Soon, the pulpits are thundering with concern. It's Sunday morning in 1848. The bells ring, the pews are full, and the reverend is in top form. But there's something new in the sermon, a warning full of righteous anger. Beware the seductive vapour, for it is written, "Let not man seek false paradise in chemical fog." People squirm in their seats, not sure if they should confess, giggle, or just grab their smelling salts. The church organist, who went to an ether party the night before, tries hard not to fall asleep during the offering. Pamphlets appear in the vestry. Ether, the devil's own perfume. They claim ether clouds the soul, weakens the will, and invites foreign wickedness, which means French philosophy and laughing without a chaperone. The drawings are scary, showing skeleton hands passing bottles in the moonlight, socialites fainting into the arms of cartoon demons. The message is, sniff at your own risk. Like all good moral panics, the warnings are delightfully vague. Some preachers say ether is a gateway to ruin, leading to absinthe, gambling, and ugly hats. Others claim it invites the supernatural, opening your spirit to ghosts and improper dancing. One enthusiastic curate even says nobody can be saved while giggling at wallpaper. The public's reaction is mixed. Some take the warning seriously, giving up ether for more traditional pastimes, like complaining about the weather or attending super long prayer meetings. Others see the sermons as a challenge. After all, nothing makes something forbidden more tempting than the church's disapproval. If God didn't want us to have ether, one dowager jokes, he would have made the parlour less boring. Meanwhile, the clergy are losing the battle against curiosity and human nature. Confessionals fill with anxious whispers. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sniffed." The church's stance becomes accidental advertising, and clever hosts start holding spiritual improvement evenings that feature just a hint of experimental vapour between hymns. Yet underneath the moralising, there's real fear that society is changing too fast. Ether is more than a fad. It's a sign of a new world where pleasure and novelty compete with tradition and restraint. The old certainties are fading, like the vapour itself. Still, the church keeps fighting. The sermons get longer, the pamphlets multiply. But by the time the last hymn is sung, half the congregation is dreaming of a lighter, brighter world, one where even the bishop might take a sniff just to see what all the fuss is about. In the end, ether doesn't destroy the soul, it just gives it something new to worry about. And in Victorian England, that's almost a sacrament. What goes up must come down. With rising addiction, ruined fortunes, and more than one awkward situation involving a bishop and a chaise lounge. The party's almost over. Almost. Morning breaks over Mayfair, and the sunlight is unforgiving. The fancy houses are quieter now. Inside, the results of last night's fun are painfully clear. Wilted flowers, overturned chairs, and aristocrats scattered like tired moths across velvet sofas. The air is thick with the smell of old flowers and regret. Nobody's laughing now, not even the dog hiding under the harpsichord, giving a never-again look. For those who went a little too far, the consequences are not just physical. The signs of too much ether are hard to miss. There are headaches that feel like buildings collapsing, nausea that strong tea can't cure, and a brain fog that makes remembering your name feel like a game. The footman brings in breakfast, dry toast and oranges for delicate stomachs, and gets greeted with groans, requests for silence, and desperate pleas for a doctor who won't judge. Fortunes are suffering too. That impressive bottle collection on the mantel is now a reminder of bad choices. Ether, cheap in small amounts, gets ruinously expensive when ordered by the case. Some of London's best families have started quietly selling off heirlooms. A painting here, a carriage there. Anything to pay the bills before the creditors start knocking. The butlers are keeping a close watch on the silverware. The housekeeper has noticed that Lady Blythe's pearls have vanished, and so has her memory of where she last left them. There's gossip, of course. Society whispers behind gloved hands. It's not just the ether anymore. It's what happened while under its influence. Tales of scandal multiply. A dowager caught napping in the bishop's hat. A future baronet found crying over a wilted fern. And one memorable incident where Lord Redgrave tried to propose to a suit of armour. Every party has a price, and reputations are the first to be sold off. The family doctor, once so enthusiastic, is now tight-lipped and tired. His patients are listless, irritable, and getting mysterious rashes. He tries to wean them off the vapour, suggesting walks in the park and strong coffee. But the habit is strong. Some swear off ether completely, vowing never to touch the stuff again until the next rainy evening, when the temptation of just one more medicinal dose is too strong. Even the servants, normally discreet, are getting tired of the chaos. They're dreaming of a house where guests only faint from boredom and the family heirlooms are used for what they're supposed to be used for. The cook refuses to make syllabub ever again. The butler has banned handkerchiefs from the dining room, and the parlourmaid eyes the ether bottle like it might grow legs and start trouble all on its own. So as the ether clouds start to clear, high society surveys the damage. There are bruised egos, empty purses, and a feeling that something has been lost. A little dignity, a lot of sleep, and maybe the last illusion that progress doesn't come with a cost. But don't worry, it's not quite over yet. In true Victorian style, there's always room for one more round, one last toast, one more attempt to chase novelty before reality calls everyone home. What is high society if not stubbornly, spectacularly slow to learn? And what is an ether hangover, if not the universe's gentle reminder that even the fanciest salons can end up on the floor? Ether addiction wasn't just a social problem, it became a medical crisis. As more fancy Victorians sought help, or were sent by their embarrassed families, doctors realised that not every problem could be solved by more ether. It starts with a quiet knock on the doctor's door. The patient arrives in a carriage, hidden behind tinted glass and a veil of shame. The family doctor, who 6 months ago was praising miracle vapours, now sits stone-faced behind his desk, looking at case notes written in a mix of optimism and panic. Symptoms: nervous exhaustion, absent-mindedness, inability to stay upright at dinner parties. Diagnosis: high society in crisis. The rehab process is predictably Victorian. The patient isn't sent to a spa, but to a relative's country house, far from temptation and the scandalous eyes of London. Prescription: fresh air, brisk walks, and, if the patient is lucky, hot chocolate instead of ether. Family members take turns providing moral support, though many prefer to watch from a distance, wary of catching whatever it is that comes from too many nights lost in chemical bliss. Withdrawal isn't easy. The body protests. Headaches, chills, inexplicable urges to cry into the curtains. Patients become irritable, restless, and stare out the window, searching for a lost sense of happiness. There are journals full of rambling thoughts, tearful promises that this time they're really done with the vapour. Sometimes someone tries to bribe the gardener for a secret supply. The gardener pretends not to hear. The doctor, once a fan of modern chemistry, now preaches the healing power of routine. A schedule is set. Early mornings, hearty breakfasts, supervised walks, and absolutely no mysterious handkerchiefs at bedtime. If the patient can be kept busy, preferably with healthy stuff like sketching, fishing, or alphabetizing the family library, so much the better. The mind, the doctor says, must be restored to equilibrium. Nobody asks if the doctor's equilibrium is holding up. Of course, there are relapses. The temptation comes back during thunderstorms, boring afternoons, or when a well-meaning visitor brings a gift-wrapped medicinal tonic. The patient swears it's for nerves. Just a drop, just this once. The cycle repeats. Family members sigh. The doctor writes new notes. Patient attempted to extract ether from lamp oil. Intervention, brisk walk, stern lecture. And the cook wonders how much longer she'll have to hide the vanilla extract. By now, word has spread among London's elite. Too much ether, and you might find yourself taking the waters in Bath, or stuck in the Scottish Highlands with your least favourite aunt. Rumours spread about secret asylums for nervous disorders, where the upper class are reformed with cold baths and moral essays. For most, the threat of being sent to the country is enough to at least pretend they're getting better. Eventually, some recover. Their minds clear, their appetite returns, and the sight of an ether bottle only makes them feel a little sick. There are promises never to touch the stuff again, at least not until the next irresistible fad comes along. The Victorian approach to rehab is a mix of medical guesswork, social pressure, and the belief that a change of scenery can fix everything. One thing's for sure when the doctor sees you now. You're not getting ether. You're getting a long walk, a cup of tea, and a pointed reminder that nothing is truly discreet in high society. Suddenly, all those rules about forks and conversation seem less important when half your friends are passed out on a couch. Victorian etiquette meets its match, and the result is a new kind of social chaos. For years, etiquette books were the Bible of high society. Big books detailing how to curtsy at the right angle, where to put a lobster fork, and how to talk without mentioning bodily functions, strong emotions, or France. Hosts were proud of their manners, and guests were terrified of using the wrong spoon. Dignity, composure, and order were everything in a good gathering. Then came ether, and with it, the slow breakdown of every social rule ever made. At first, hosts tried to keep up appearances. Invitations were still handwritten, parlours were arranged perfectly. Sofa here, tea tray there, fainting couch tucked behind the aspidistra just in case. Everyone arrived in their best gloves, and the conversation was about the weather, local politics, and how nice Lady Elmsworth's flowers were. The trouble started with the handkerchiefs. At the first whiff of ether, polite talk fell apart. The Dowager Countess, a symbol of decorum, was soon telling ghost stories to the butler. Lord Featherstone, usually unable to laugh, was giggling at the chair covers. Talk about the Crimean War turned into arguments about whether the dog could be taught to play. The rigid rules disappeared with the vapour. Etiquette books didn't say what to do if a guest fainted onto the tea cart, or how to wake up someone who had fallen asleep in the umbrella stand. No chapter said how to respond to a poetry reading delivered while hanging upside down from the library ladder. The advice on avoiding scandal was silent. On the issue of spontaneous charades with the furniture, the staff did their best to keep things together. Maids quietly cleaned up broken teacups and moved unconscious guests to the music room to recover. But even they admitted that things were changing. Servants who used to whisper were now betting on which guest would be the first to talk to the goldfish. And then there were the apologies. The next morning, the most common activity in Mayfair was writing notes. So sorry for the incident with the pudding, or apologies if I recited Tennyson at the Potted Palms. Etiquette books were updated, adding footnotes for unusual merriment and unexpected horizontal guests. For some, the breakdown of the social order was freeing. People realised they could survive an evening without following every rule, and maybe even have fun. Salons got louder, laughter became normal, and the fear of embarrassment faded as everyone realised that nobody had made it through the night with their dignity intact. Of course, that there were casualties. The family silver got damaged, carpets got stained, and the reputations of some women never recovered. But by the time the ether craze was ending, etiquette books were gathering dust, and the memory of those wild nights had become legends. In the end, it was clear that etiquette is no match for the consequences, or for a society determined to chase novelty wherever it goes, even if it's under the fainting couch. Addiction has a price. Family fortunes shrink, inheritances disappear, and that second home in Bath quietly gets sold. The only thing growing is your collection of empty bottles and regrets. In the early days, ether seemed harmless enough. A fun new thing for the bored and wealthy, a scientific party trick that cost less than a hat and promised more fun than another poetry reading. But as with all trends that sweep through the drawing rooms of the wealthy, the costs started to rise. At first, it was just a few extra pounds to the pharmacist, a tip to the chemist, or the price of another ether flask for your collection. Nothing the estate couldn't handle. But fads, especially those that get you high, never stay modest for long. What starts as a treat turns into a weekly thing, then a daily need. Households that used to be proud of being careful with money now find themselves ordering ether by the case. The pharmacist's records fill with aristocratic names, and some chemists start offering discounts for regular customers, which is never a good sign. Even the butler notices that the liquor bills are down, but the ether bills have gone way up. The financial impact creeps in quietly. Heirlooms once displayed with pride start disappearing. First to go is the silver tea set, temporarily pawned to pay a bill. Then a family portrait, loaned to a relative and never returned. By the time anyone notices the missing candelabra, the money is gone. The drawing rooms are still grand, but the wealth is leaking away. Inheritance, that Victorian thing, is suddenly less of a guarantee. The next generation, who expected to inherit land, now find themselves with worn carpets and a pile of unpaid bills. Letters are sent to old friends asking about jobs. Daughters who hoped for fancy husbands are told to consider anyone with a reliable income, even if he does something as unrefined as work. Social status, always fragile, starts to wobble. The biggest ether fans become cautionary tales whispered about over weak tea. Did you hear about Lord Fernwick? Sold his dog just to keep up with his pharmacist. Debts are politely called temporary setbacks, and the annual trip to Europe is cancelled in favour of some fresh air in the country. Meanwhile, there is never a shortage of ether for the next party. Reputation's currency, spent fast. Gossip thrives on rich families undone by ether's ruins. Headlines scream their fall. Invitations dry up for the notorious, new wallets appear. Industrialists, no vapour around, just cash. Some weather it, save the name, hide the bottles, relatives go abroad. For many, wealth built for generations vanishes fast. Just empty flasks, invitations to bygone parties, the memory of ruin in silk, everyone looking away. For the ether crowd, the hangovers in the accounts, legacy of loss, lesson in excess, tale in fading ink. Not all saw it as bad. Writers, painters swore it helped them create new worlds, ignoring the dancing raccoons on walls. Just inspiration. With poets and fainting couches in every Victorian house, it was inevitable. Ether leaped into the studio, offering creative types, always a bit dazed, a new muse in a tiny bottle. The effect was instant. Journals filled with sketches, poems on cookbooks, a symphony on the triangle. Take Percy Marshwood, a minor painter with a major bottle collection. Ether sparked productivity, eclipsing his gloomy landscapes. Friends saw canvases of mythological clouds, an upside-down self-portrait critics called alarming and weird. Marshwood said the clouds talked to him. Writers joined in. Ether evenings at salons, poets competing until the vapour wore off with mixed results. Some verses soared, others repeated, "I am a turnip" for 12 stanzas. Audiences cheered it all. Novelists used ether for wild fiction, plots twisting, characters changing species, heroines riding giant cabbages into the sunset. Publishers marketed literary etherism, sales boomed. Critics called it modern to survive. Not all efforts triumphed. Composer Geraldina Nash, after communing with her metronome, wrote the music of the spheres. The audience called it bracing, confusing, and great for waking pets. Sculptors saw shapes in marble but glued egg cups accidentally. Critics and society split. Some saw ether as divine, freeing the mind. Others noted masterpieces came from strong tea and no sleep. Letters to the Times alternated, praising genius and complaining about talking wallpaper. Fashion burned bright, then faded. Salons went back to safety. Ether went back to cabinets or the garden. Artists had vivid stories, embarrassing, dazzling. For a brief moment, the world was stranger, the art bolder, inspiration a sniff away. Ether may have gone, but the memory stayed, with unfinished canvases and that line, "My darling, I swear the wallpaper winked." Doctors sobered up and gave warnings. Medical journals had horror stories. Parliament talked regulation. The era of carefree sniffing ended. At first it was gentle. Notes in the Lancet. Cases of excess. Society ignored it, busy with waistcoats and anchovy paste. Incidents piled up. Fainting spells in gardens. Gas lamp explosions. People believing tortoises were reciting Shakespeare. When Lord Derby was found sleepwalking in just a cravat, it couldn't be ignored. Houses buzzed. Is ether safe? Keep it away from kids, the elderly, and those who can't use a fireplace poker. Doctors, not keen on admitting a mistake, wrote angry letters. One physician called ether a menace to moral and physical health. Physicians distanced themselves, calling their ether strictly medicinal. Lady Farquhar's incident, an unfortunate misunderstanding. Parliament, always watching public opinion, waded in. Debates raged about chemical amusements. Committees formed, questions asked. One MP wondered if ether undermined the empire's moral backbone. No one knew, but something had to be done. Taxes on ether were discussed, then dropped due to tonics used in Parliament. Newspapers who fueled the craze switched sides fast. Case studies filled columns. Lady Harrington, once poised, needed propping against the sideboard at dinner parties. Cartoonists drew matrons chasing hats in vapour. Penny dreadfuls described ether mayhem, with medical opinions and a chase scene with a startled bishop. Households locked away bottles, eyeing guests who sniffed the centrepiece too much. Apothecaries quietly removed flamboyant displays. Even staunch fans reconsidered after Queen Victoria switched to smelling salts. In weeks, the public mood shifted. Once harmless, ether became reckless. Parties dwindled, invitations grew vague. The craze faded under suspicion, shame, and disinfectant. But Victorians forgot quickly. Soon, a new novelty would arrive. Ether relegated to a list of fads. Londoners nursed hangovers, counted fingers, and celebrated surviving another public health scare. Ether addiction faded, but the search for the next fix never stopped. Victorians lined up for cocaine, tooth drops, laudanum, anything numbing the dread of being rich and bored. As ether fizzled, chemists swapped bottles. Laudanum, an opium tincture, was the new must-have for headaches, heartbreak, long sermons. Housewives dabbed it on, poets swore by it. Even dogs got doses. The pharmaceutical world offered solutions for all woes. Cocaine tooth drops? Recommended by the Queen's dentist for smiles. Cough syrups had morphine. Nerve tonics promised relief from hysteria, ennui. There was Vin Mariani, coca leaf wine, championed by popes, writers, and anyone wanting to feel blessed and bulletproof. Victorians loved a quick fix in a handsome bottle. Doctors became pitchmen. Newspapers printed testimonials. No longer does my husband weep at mutton. Since taking cordial, my mother-in-law is bearable. It's hard to know where the advertising ended and the experiment began. Ether parties became laudanum picnics, medicinal wine tastings, pianists played dreamy sonatas, guests passed bottles, exchanging tips to mask the taste. New etiquette arose. Bring your own opium pipe. How many drops of tonic before dancing? What to say to a guest confiding in the umbrella stand? Problems persisted with new packaging. Medical journals warned of cough syrup dependency, stimulant abuse, weird behaviours. Parliament debated new regulations. Chemists quietly removed colourful elixirs from front displays, moving them to a back shelf labelled for special customers only. Distraction thirst, impossible to quench. The next trend always arrived. Some touted electricity, mild shocks to invigorate. Others, mineral waters, sea air, ice baths, diets of watercress and hope. Spiritualists, mesmerists, doctors prescribing calisthenics while standing on your head. Yet nothing matched the ether era's chaos, the thrill of the unknown, the absurdity of society unmoored. Wealth, curiosity and denial fueled it all. So the Victorians moved on, seeking, sampling, never satisfied. As fads blossomed and faded, one truth remained. History's greatest addiction is to novelty itself. The ether craze's legacy lingers, a cautionary tale and comedy. Each time someone invents a wellness trend or miracle cure, thank the Victorians for blazing the trail with style, absurdity, and no safety. It lingers in how we talk about health and happiness. Scientific advances, miracle remedies, breakthrough solutions. The Victorians adored those phrases. They swapped vapour for supplements and electrotherapy for cold plunges, but the urge is the same, to fix annoyances. Ether is gone, but its ghost haunts pharmacies, under collagen gummies and detox teas. Stories from the era have a mythic glow. Some say ether fueled creativity, others say it was trouble. You can still hear whispers at society dinners, tales of poets finding new universes and aristocrats dancing with invisible giraffes. Like all disasters, the facts blur into legend, each retelling dramatic and less plausible. Modern lessons abound. Humans will do anything to escape boredom, even inhale something like burnt licorice and be convinced the friend is a potted fern. Progress is a double-edged sword. The same curiosity that leads to breakthroughs also leads to expensive people crawling under tables. Then there's the question of trust, particularly in science, doctors, and the neighbour's latest thing. The Victorians learned, expertise isn't wisdom. For every advance, there was questionable advice, given by a man with wild hair and a dubious certificate. Ether's story is a reminder to ask not just does it work, but also what could go wrong. The social angle is instructive. Ether spread through drawing rooms, dinner parties, groupthink. If the Duchess did it, so did everyone else. Trends sweep through society, driven by curiosity, envy, and the thrill of joining in, whether Victorian vapour or a juice cleanse. The herd instinct is alive. But maybe the lesson is no matter how absurd things get, people adapt, recover, and laugh at disasters. Salons that had ether chaos returned to order. Silverware reputations recovered. Even the most embarrassing tales became dinner party fodder, softened by time. So the next time you see a wellness trend, remember the Victorians. Remember their optimism, blunders, and ether's ghost-haunting miracle cures. If history teaches us anything, it's that we are rarely as wise as we hope, but usually more entertaining. And somewhere behind the curtain, there's a whiff of vapour waiting for someone to start the comedy again. As the ether fades, you're grateful for air, a mattress, and warning labels. But laughter reminds you history's worst disasters make the best stories. It's late in Victorian London, carriages left behind memories, the scent of burnt lace. Great houses are quiet, with ticking clocks, creaking floorboards, and a snoring baronet. Downstairs, servants tidy up, empty bottles tucked away, spilled punch mopped up, ether-soaked handkerchiefs dried in the night. You, a survivor of fashionable chaos, are alone in your chamber. The mattress sags, the fire flickers, a mist rises off the city. You breathe deeply, just oxygen, no additives. Your mind drifts to absurdities. Uncles with lampshades for helmets, a countess swearing her corset could sing, a rumour about the Queen's footman talking to goldfish. Victorian sleep, like Victorian life, is a mixed blessing. Beds are softer than a stone floor, but only just. Your pillow is filled with feathers, or the family goose. The nightgown is scratchy, but it's yours. You're free of vapour, scandal, and anyone reading experimental poetry. Outside, the city grows quiet. No more clinking glasses or outbursts. You close your eyes, letting the day ebb. Maybe your heart is pounding from laughter or escaping an ether-inspired suitor. Here, in the quiet dark, you reflect on how strange people can be, on fads, and on the simple miracle of an uneventful night. You can hear the sigh of a society exhausted by its own inventiveness. Upstairs, the family dreams of better times and sensible hobbies. Downstairs, the staff dreams of a week without spills. Even the cat relaxes, safe from swooning guests and airborne canapes. And so you tuck yourself in and give thanks for the lamp that glows without open flame, for the tea that doesn't require a prescription, and for the knowledge that at least tonight your greatest risk is a slightly cold foot, not an accidental explosion. In a world wobbling between progress and folly, the chance to simply rest feels like the ultimate luxury. As you drift off, shadows settle into shapes, and the memories of Victorian excess turn soft and distant, like stories told in the glow of a dying fire. Tomorrow the world will invent new troubles and fresh amusements, but tonight you are safe, blanketed in quiet, watched over by the ghosts of 1,000 well-intentioned disasters. Sleep tight, don't sniff the vapours, and may your dreams be free of both fainting couches and impromptu science experiments, because the past may be strange, but at least bedtime is still mostly sacred. It's opening night at the Royal Opera, and every noble in London is squeezed into boxes tighter than their waistcoats. But instead of swooning at the soprano, everyone's clutching lace handkerchiefs doused in ether. By intermission, half the audience is giggling at the chandeliers. The conductor has forgotten which opera they're performing, and at least one duke is convinced the second act is a personal hallucination. Picture the scene. London's cultural elite, dressed in shimmering silk and velvet, parading up the marble steps with all the solemnity of a royal funeral. The opera house is ablaze with gaslight, the air thick with expensive perfume, and the rustle of programmes printed on paper so fine it could serve as a dinner roll in a pinch. A hush falls as the curtain rises. The prima donna appears, her voice soaring to the rafters. But attention wavers, because tonight something new is stealing the show. Word has spread among the cognoscenti. Ether is the must-have accessory of the season. Its effects are said to make any experience transcendent, which for the opera is considered both a promise and a threat. By the time the overture begins, half the crowd is already partaking. Delicate sniffles echo through the gallery as lace handkerchiefs flutter from box to box, more contagious than any yawn or cough. It doesn't take long for decorum to dissolve. The baritone's aria is interrupted by fits of laughter from a box usually reserved for judges in the stalls. A viscount whispers that he can see the music and spends most of the act staring intently at the violin section across the aisle. Lady Penelope is so taken with the colour of the curtains that she misses an entire duet. The orchestra bravely carries on, even as one of the cellists succumbs to an uncontrollable case of the giggles. Backstage, word of the audience's altered state spreads quickly. The soprano, convinced her performance has never been more inspired, receives applause so thunderous and oddly timed that she suspects a second encore might require a medical team. The tenor, always quick to seize a trend, requests a discreet sniff before the final act, reasoning that if the critics are incapacitated, no review can possibly be bad. By intermission, chaos reigns. The grand foyer, meant for genteel conversation and discreet flirting, is now a carnival of confusion. A duke attempts to order oysters from a statue. The matron of a prominent family is seen debating philosophy with the coat-rack footman Ferry smelling salts and strong tea through the crowd, but it's no use. Ether has turned London's most dignified night out into a gently swirling masquerade of nonsense. Meanwhile, the opera management is at its wits' end. The manager contemplates adding a new warning to the please refrain from vaporous indulgence during dramatic areas. Ushers do their best to keep order, gently waking those who have drifted off mid-quartet and encouraging patrons to clap only when the music actually. But tradition has surrendered to trend. When the final curtain falls, it does so to a standing ovation, a feat achieved mostly because no one can remember whether they're meant to sit or stand. The critics stagger home, their reviews full of poetic confusion. Never before has Ida seemed so perpendicular. Rumours of the night's debauchery travel swiftly, and the opera house secures its place in the annals of both high culture and high farce. Thus, the opera house incident goes down in history. A cautionary tale for the ages, a masterclass in what happens when ether and elegance collide, and proof that even the finest arts are no match for the absurdity of human curiosity. Victorian clubs were all about exclusivity until someone started an ether appreciation society, with weekly meetings, questionable snacks, and a sign-up sheet for experimental volunteers. Doctors gave lectures between fits of giggles, while respectable matrons tried to decide whether the side effects included sudden ballroom dancing. Spoiler, they did. It began innocently enough in the smoky back rooms of London's most prestigious gentlemen's clubs. The Athenaeum, the Reform, even the stuffy Travellers' Club, places where members usually argued about parliamentary procedure and the relative merits of snipe shooting. But with the ether craze in full swing, a few forward thinkers decided it was time for a more progressive gathering. Thus the Ether Sniffing Society was born. Membership was by invitation only, though in practice a well-timed anecdote about one's last ether experience was the fastest route in. The rules were simple. Bring your own handkerchief, don't set fire to the upholstery, and try to remain vertical, at least until the first lecture concluded. Meetings took place in a haze of cigar smoke and competitive nervous laughter. Bowls of questionable snacks, pickled walnuts, anchovy, biscuits, and a mysterious cheese from the continent were on hand for those with a strong constitution. Each gathering featured a guest speaker, usually a doctor or chemist, who claimed to have studied the effects of ether extensively. Though their research notes were often suspiciously wine-stained and smelled faintly of vapour, they presented their findings with the solemnity of a parliamentary debate, pausing only for dramatic sniffing breaks. One memorable evening featured Dr. Ambrose Snell, who argued mid-giggle that ether was the very cornerstone of modern social advancement. Half the audience agreed. The other half forgot the topic and spent the rest of the night counting the ceiling tiles. The society was not limited to men. In time it became so fashionable that even the most proper matrons insisted on attending, chaperoned, of course, by their most responsible niece or an unimpressed clergyman. The result was a uniquely Victorian blend of scientific inquiry and unchecked silliness. One matron, Lady Duckworth, famously declared after her second dose that she could now see the future, and it involved far fewer corsets. Experiments, such as they were conducted with great ceremony. Some members claimed to have unlocked the secrets of the universe. Others merely developed a strong attachment to the club's stuffed owl mascot. There were attempts to measure the duration and quality of ether-induced euphoria. But the only consistent finding was that it made people unusually interested in reciting Latin, arm wrestling, or debating whether the room was spinning clockwise or anti-clockwise. Of course, not all went according to plan. One disastrous meeting ended with the club president stuck halfway out a window, convinced he was auditioning for the opera. Another evening saw the society banned from the Reform Club for excessive merriment and unlicensed cartwheeling. Rumour had it that several prominent wives, after investigating, returned home with the firm conviction that men could not be left alone with either ether or cheese for more than half an hour. As word spread, imitation clubs sprang up everywhere in the city, each one jockeying to be named the most inspired or, failing that, the group least likely to be cited for a public nuisance. Eventually, the ether-sniffing craze subsided, just like the fashion itself, but the memory lingered alongside some faint burn marks on the carpet and a collective astonishment at how quickly science could utterly go astray. Ultimately, that society stands as a testament to Victorian ambition and sheer oddity, demonstrating that no matter how exclusive the gathering, you're only a whiff away from utter, glorious foolishness. Getting your portrait painted once required sitting absolutely motionless for endless hours. Then came ether, the marvellous new sedative. Suddenly, high society portraitists were receiving commissions from patrons who could barely keep their eyelids open and were occasionally sliding right out of their chairs mid-session. The outcomes? Let's simply say the 1850s ushered in a golden era for uncompleted faces and purely accidental cubism. Visualize the scene. You're inside the vast, drafty studio of a highly sought-after artist. Sunlight barely penetrates the dirty panes, illuminating swirling clouds of turpentine and expectation. The painter, a mess of wild hair and a stained waistcoat, brandishes his brushes. You, dressed in your finest satin or stiff starch, settle onto the uncomfortable posing chair, truly a throne of sheer agony. Hold perfectly still, the painter demands. Attempt to appear both stately and profoundly introspective. You consent, your lower back instantly complaining. The time drags on, the tea cools. For generations, these portrait sessions were truly a test of sheer willpower. Models practiced calming breaths, mused about the evening's meal, or tried to simply ignore their screaming muscles. One tiny, inappropriate twitch, and the artist would groan, repaint, or if you were especially unlucky, they'd insist you start the entire thing over. It was a long trial of relentless tedium, with the reward of eternal recognition and sometimes a suspiciously elongated nose. But then ether arrived on the scene. No longer was holding still a terrible torture. It became a mere side effect. Society, always chasing an easier route to immortality, embraced the new relaxant enthusiastically. Sitters arrived with elegant handkerchiefs, subtly perfumed, confident they could easily glide through the terrible ordeal. Portraitists, initially quite doubtful, swiftly adapted. If the client began to snore, it was simply a fresh form of artistic repose. Ether radically transformed the entire experience. Some subjects became so utterly tranquil, they nearly blended with the furniture, gazing vacantly into space with expressions of serene confusion. The artist sometimes had to gently poke a patron to wake them, desperately hoping to finish the eyes before their subject completely floated out of the composition. Lord Fitzwilliam's painting became famous for its faraway expression. The whispers said he was contemplating the very essence of existence, but in reality, he had simply forgotten his own name. Naturally, accidents were common. Some etherized clients, just moments before the critical sitting, would abruptly burst into uncontrollable giggles, completely lose their balance, or slowly slide from the chair. Children brought in to be immortalized for family records went limp as rag dolls and required propping up with pillows and a helpful unseen maid. At least one session concluded with the sitter facing entirely the wrong way, yielding a pensive rear view that critics lauded as daringly avant-garde. The fashion even reached the highest levels of artistic sophistication. Society journals breathlessly reported on the new serenity now visible in the faces of London's elite. "Such poise," gushed one reviewer, "such creative handling of drool." Portraitists, emboldened by the demand, experimented with softer edges and more ambiguous backgrounds, just in case their subject swayed or completely faded mid-pose. Yet beneath the novelty, not everyone was satisfied. A few traditional artists grumbled that true character couldn't be captured through mere chemicals. "A portrait must reveal the soul," one emphatically declared, "not just a slack jawline." Family matriarchs worried that children painted under the influence might appear too jovial, or, worse, slightly cross-eyed. Rumours circulated that the Queen herself had forbidden the technique in royal sessions, though several courtiers' likenesses look suspiciously dreamy. Inevitably, like all fleeting fads, the ether portrait craze diminished. Artists quietly returned to demanding absolute stillness and tiresome patience. Clients resumed their stiff suffering, and everyone agreed to simply never mention the unfortunate Floating Earl series. Still, a few dreamy, slightly askew portraits remain, a final tribute to the era when a little bit of vapour promised beauty, comfort and, for once, the art of completely ignoring the weight. All good things, and even disastrous vices, must reach an end. One foggy week, the city's ether reserves dangerously dwindled. Socialites began to panic. Scuffles broke out at the local apothecary's black market. Vials were passed around in delicate silk handbags. Desperate noblemen sent footmen on clandestine midnight errands. And gossip insisted the Duchess of Wrexham had resorted to inhaling turpentine just to take the edge off her nerves. It all began with one simple, innocent statement uttered by a preoccupied chemist. "I'm afraid we're entirely out of ether, madam." Initially, high society didn't quite grasp the severity. After all, temporary shortages happen. There was the infamous Great Ice Cream Famine of 43 and the miserable gin drought of 39. But ether, surely such a modern wonder would flow endlessly. Yet, as the days passed, nervous whispers travelled through London's elegant drawing rooms and glittering ballrooms. The pharmacies were besieged. Well-dressed patrons queued before dawn, clutching empty flasks and increasingly imaginative stories of medical necessity. The chemists, facing a literal stampede of agitated clients, began rationing their tiny remaining stock. An ounce for Lady Thornton's fragile nerves, half a dram for the vicar's spiritual exercises. When word definitively spread that supplies were dangerously low, tempers exploded. Lady Jessup, usually the very picture of composure, was spotted physically wrestling a rival for the last available bottle, her ostrich plume askew and her dignity nowhere to be found. Desperation fosters ingenuity. Resourceful butlers arranged secret deals with poorly stocked dispensaries, while ambitious footmen were sent out on intense midnight scavenging expeditions. The black market absolutely flourished. Unlabelled vials were sold in shadowy doorways, the vendors swearing it was the genuine article and not merely gin mixed with eucalyptus oil. Scented handkerchiefs were now guarded more fiercely than ancestral family jewellery. Lady Pembleton even installed a lockbox for her vapour reserves, protected by a pug with a surprisingly vicious bark. Social gatherings took on a desperate new vibe. The old etiquette, first come, first served, gave way to thinly disguised trickery. Guests arrived exceptionally early, hoping to secure their claim and keep a wary eye on the delicate decanter. Hosts attempted to dilute the vapour with rose water or cologne, but the results were utterly dismal, and the subsequent complaints legendary. Sir Bernard attempted to create his own substitute, which only resulted in a house full of uncontrollably sneezing guests and a drawing room that reeked of menthol for many weeks. As the crisis continued, the city's collective mood soured. Gossip was rampant. Did the Duchess of Wrexham truly resort to turpentine? Was the Prince Consort hoarding the city's ether stock in the palace cellars? Who exactly was the shadowy Vapour King, now seen loitering outside the Opera House, offering tiny vials to frantic debutantes? The newspapers had a field day, publishing unhelpful advice like breathing deeply, a safe alternative, and cautioning readers about a rise in accidental inhalations of lamp oil. The creative classes, deprived of their inspiration, declared a city-wide malaise. No new poetry was being written. Artists stared blankly at their canvases. One notoriously melancholy playwright refused to get out of bed, sending notes via footmen, "No vapour, no Hamlet." Society, unhinged from its favourite bad habit, tried to fill the emptiness with endless tea, tedious card games, and, in one disastrous instance, a revival of highly interpretive dance. Just as sheer panic threatened to become permanent, a large new shipment finally arrived from the continent. The crisis ended as suddenly as it began. Ether was rationed, then flowed freely again. London's parlours were filled with laughter, lively music and overwhelming relief. The shortage was remembered as both a terrifying trauma and a hilarious farce. Fuel for endless gossip, material for new plays, and inspiration for one particularly memorable masquerade ball, where the entire theme was survival of the wittiest. The Great Ether Shortage became an instant legend, proving that high society, when deprived of its favourite comfort, can be both wildly resourceful and profoundly absurd. The authorities decided they had seen enough. Parliament held debates, doctors wept openly, and a coalition of mothers marched on Westminster, brandishing pamphlets and empty vials. As new legislation loomed, the most dedicated ether devotees threw one last, completely delirious party, complete with a secret knock, coded invitations, and a string quartet valiantly playing through billowing clouds of chemical fumes. By the next morning, the era was over, but the stories were only just beginning. It started with a hushed word in the House of Commons: regulation. At first, society barely even noticed. Parliament had a history of threatening to ban everything from overly seditious pamphlets to excessively enthusiastic bagpipes, after all. But this time the overall feeling was different. Doctors published alarming research. The Times ran sensational editorials titled, "Is Civilization Itself in Danger?" Moral reformers thundered from the pulpit. Even Queen Victoria's beloved corgis seemed to look wary. The end was clearly coming, and it smelled faintly of medicinal vapour. The news spread like suddenly spilled punch at a garden party. Invitations to ether gatherings became far more clandestine, passed along with a knowing wink and a theatrical flourish. The city's best hostesses competed fiercely for the honour of throwing the last genuine ether frolic, each one trying to outdo the others with more complex themes, costumed footmen and tableaux vivants featuring local poets who may or may not have had any clue where they actually were. Entry was by password only. Herbal infusion, and the guests whispered of a secret competition. Who would be the last person to fully faint? Inside these disappearing salons, the atmosphere was bittersweet, a wild blend of profound nostalgia, brazen bravado, and dark gallows humour. Some guests swore they would never give up their precious handkerchiefs, even if it meant smuggling them over to the continent. Others, being far more practical, settled in for one final round of debauchery, determined to make it one for the history books. Ether was rationed, meticulously cherished, and in one truly memorable incident, actually auctioned off in exchange for a priceless snuff box and a signed portrait of Lord Byron's footman. The musicians tried their best, playing graceful waltzes that grew increasingly surreal as the vapour thickened. Poets improvised dramatic odes to lost evenings and entirely forgotten names. Old rivalries were suddenly forgotten, old scandals immediately revived. And one gentleman made a surprisingly passionate declaration of love to a large potted palm tree. Even the family dog was dressed up for the occasion, looking resplendent in a borrowed cravat and a monocle. Outside, the world changed rapidly. Parliament passed the ban with minimal fuss and a maximum of severe finger-wagging. Chemists quietly removed ether from their shelves. Doctors locked their medicine cabinets. Police raids instantly made headlines. There are tales of desperate last-minute flights to Paris, cryptic coded telegrams, and the black market's brief, completely spectacular boom. The city's ether elite, so recently at the absolute centre of all fashion, now found themselves instantly relics, relegated to the mere footnotes of polite society. But as with all great finales, there was both profound loss and much laughter. Ether, for all its intense chaos, gave a whole generation of people stories they would continue to tell for years. The legend of the last ether ball grew with every single retelling. A massive chandelier was swung from by a viscount, a duchess who recited the Iliad entirely backwards, and a butler who, for one glorious moment, perfectly conducted the entire orchestra using only his incredibly expressive eyebrows. And when the sun finally rose over a quieter, much cleaner London, the very last of the vapour gently drifted away, instantly replaced by tea, utter sobriety, and the occasional pang of deep nostalgia. High society straightened its gloves, expertly repaired its reputations, and prepared itself for whatever new madness would arrive next. The final curtain fell not with a terrifying crash, but with a quiet sigh, a small giggle, and the soft rustle of expensive silk, as the aristocrats of old learned at last how to face the morning without a chemical crutch. Ether is gone, but its remarkable story still lingers, a mere wisp of rebellious fun, a powerful cautionary tale, and a perfectly unintentional comedy for the ages. So tonight, as you slowly drift off in your clean, comfortable bed, surrounded by the gentle hum of electricity and absolutely zero vaporized party substances, take a slow, genuinely grateful breath. Spare a little thought for those ancestors who bravely survived centuries of strange medical fads, social disasters, and whatever exactly passed for wellness in the age of the tightly laced corset. Remember, history's most fashionable disasters were simply people. People who were intensely bored, naturally curious, and sometimes just a little too eager to simply trust a glass bottle handed to them at a grand party. You've survived an entire evening in the very heart of Victorian high society, watched the most brilliant minds of the era gently pass out in colourful parlours, and seen entire fortunes disappear faster than a single sniff at a masquerade. You've witnessed the supposed dignity of the upper class utterly dissolve into uncontrollable giggles, profound confusion, and occasionally spontaneous waltzing with the heavy curtains, all in the singular name of keeping up with the very latest social trend, all while politely pretending that absolutely nothing out of the ordinary was truly happening. But through all the sweetly scented fog and the unfortunate accidental arson, there's something stubbornly admirable about it all, the inherent resilience of people simply trying to feel a little less alone, a little more alive, even if it meant making a complete, utter mess of their lives in the process. The Victorians may have lost their firm grip on sobriety, good etiquette, and basic common sense, but certainly not their powerful flair for the dramatic. So, as you finally tuck yourself in tonight, allow yourself to be quietly thankful for reliable modern medicine, clear safety regulations, precise labels, and the simple miracle of waking up tomorrow with all your personal dignity and both your eyebrows perfectly intact. The people of the past may have been outrageous, often confused, and deeply misguided, but they were also endlessly inventive. And let's be honest, they were kind of hilarious. Because history isn't solely a record of human suffering or great triumph. It's solid proof that people are inherently stubborn, eternally hopeful, and, above all else, gloriously ridiculous. Good night, sleep well, and may your dreams be absolutely free of both fainting couches and spontaneous Victorian raves.